I always know it's going to be a good guest on the show when I see them bobbing their head to the music in the background.
From Dallas, Texas, this is Anarchast.
Greetings, cryptographers and golden insects. Welcome back to Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. I will be Patrick Smith. Today's guest is the Robert Allen, entrepreneur, developer, Christian, founder of CoinCube, which we're going to talk about today, and producer of our literal number one favorite cartoon, Bitcoin and Friends. Welcome to the show, sir.
Patrick, you are too kind, sir. I appreciate all the love. I really do. Yeah, the show is still happening. We had a little bit of a slowdown. To be real, I guess, honest with you, my brother Chris is the main artistic force in the show development, and he had a rough year, like a lot of folks with government shutting down the world for no good reason. His other businesses and where he was kind of bringing in his income, he took a bit of a hit. So long story short, he had some business that came up that he needed to do some video production work that came in the door. And so he had to kind of prioritize. Sadly, we had a lot of people giving us money when we first started the show, and the donations have trickled off to almost a total standstill. So it's been hard to put the show on the top of our list of priorities for that reason. But we're still working on it. It's happening. Episode 6 was released, maybe 2 months ago, roughly, I think it was. Pretty well received, and working on episode 7, and that is very close to being released. I think we'll be able to get it done and out the door, I'm hoping, by the end of this month. But like I said, it's kind of had to take a bit of a seat on the back burner for the time being. But yeah, we're still working at it. I'm excited. We've got 7 and 8 kind of in the process. It should be done within the next few months here. We're going to go back and revise some of the early episodes. I can't remember if we talked about that the last time, but basically the plan is to kind of take the show and redo it in a little bit more of a PG rated kind of direction. We feel like we probably limited our audience a bit and hurt ourselves in that way. And we want to get the word out to as many people as we can about why Bitcoin is important, why people need to understand it, need to learn about it, need to invest in it ultimately. And you don't have to invest a lot of money in Bitcoin for it to be a life-changing investment. I was just writing an article before we jumped on this call, and looking at some of these numbers, it's mind-blowing. But if you had put $100 into Bitcoin a decade ago, you would have been able to buy 100 Bitcoin, let's say $1 per Bitcoin. That's now worth $3.5 million. And so that's the kind of opportunity that I firmly believe we still are going to see, even from here, when you look at the total market cap of Bitcoin at around $650 billion. If it replaces gold, which I think it really is poised to take most of the market cap of gold in the next decade, let's say, or maybe even the next 5 years, perhaps. But if it does that means we have a 15x increase in price from here, which would put one Bitcoin at $500,000 per Bitcoin, 500K per. And that's just looking at gold, which is really a drop in the bucket when you're looking at larger, like M2 money supply, which is the broad money supply globally. That's something like 100 to 150 trillion, depending on kind of how you slice that. And so that's where you get into Bitcoin being worth maybe several million per coin at some point in the next couple of years or decade at the least, I would say. So it's not too late. You didn't miss the boat. And in a lot of ways, because of Lindy effect, which is, the idea that as a technology or company grows and persists over time, that the odds of that technology or company being replaced or failing or so on diminishes more and more. And so Bitcoin really has the Lindy effect, kind of at its back, and the wind is behind it. And it's safer now than it ever has been to buy and hold Bitcoin as a long-term investment. The prospects just continue to look better and better. But yeah, so that's, to me, the show is ultimately about educating people about this technology. And so we want to make sure we reach the broadest audience. And so that's our goal with hopefully what will be a bit of a revision of some of the first 5 episodes, let's say, clean them up a bit, get rid of some of the vulgarity, and hopefully make it something that we could actually see families watch together, let's say. And so that's, as you mentioned, I am a Christian. When I grew up, born and raised in the church, like a lot of folks, I had my prodigal son years. And actually, just this past summer, I had a pretty amazing experience where I really just came back to my roots and to understanding the value of tradition, of Christian tradition in particular, and really was humbled. I think it's easy when, for me growing up in the church in Ohio, where I was born and raised, it was easy to see hypocrisy. And one good example of this was, I think I had maybe I was young and able to see through the lies and the bullshit, but I really never bought into to the Bushes, right? To Bush Jr. and Sr. And so a lot of Christians bought the quote, conservative Republican Party line. And I think that was a big part of where I ended up becoming disillusioned ultimately with the church is I saw a lot of people that I think were really misled and started conflating, basically blindly following their government with following God. And so that was a big part of, I think, what kind of pushed me away from the church, and spent about a decade plus, much of that time in New York City, and really just kind of trying to live the dream that we are sold by big media and by the world that tells you, if you have money and you have a lot of extramarital sex and you just kind of live for, instant or immediate gratification and just fulfill your fleshly desires, that you are going to find fulfillment and happiness and all of that. And I, traveled down many of those roads, found them to be ultimately empty. So that's kind of where, as the prodigal son story in the Bible talks about, that's where I found myself realizing that, maybe I have made some errors and some missteps. So I found myself coming back to my roots. And so for those out there who are watching, who might be coming from, sort of millennial generation and younger, I think we have in seen, rightly so, I think sometimes some hypocrisy in the older generations. We have also perhaps thrown the baby out with the bathwater. And so I'm hopeful to see that perhaps our generation, and I honestly think Bitcoin is a part of this, our generation is fighting its own battles, but I believe it's going to start realizing that we do need God, and that there is good and evil in this world. And when you see, for me, I think a big part of this transition was realizing that there are people out there that are doing terribly evil things. If you look at Epstein, for example, and some of what is believed to have been going on his island with young people and with young women, it's hard to just buy into this. Hey, let's just all live and let live, and you do whatever you want, and I do whatever I want. I mean, when you start seeing that kind of behavior, and you realize that people are really capable of doing some heinous things, it gives you pause, and it makes you start to question, I guess, some of what would be considered sort of the liberal way of viewing things. And so yeah, I've had a pretty, I guess, like a lot of us, a transformative year, a year that's made me question and re-examine a lot. So
is that why there was a change to is that why you chose to go back and redo some of the cartoon to make it more family friendly? Is that part of that, or is it just a money decision?
To be honest, it's both. It's both. I mean, it is, I want to produce content that is going to reach people. And I think, this is a good example of biblical principles tend to just work well in the world. So it is a good business decision to make a show that is more PG rated, because we're going to have a much larger audience, and we're going to be less likely to have YouTube or other channels censor our content, because for sure, at least according to the official reasoning from them, our channel was more or less shadow banned by YouTube because our content was considered, I think they said it was crass or something like that, but I can't remember the exact wordage. But
it was. I loved every minute of it.
yeah. And look, I think I still find crass humor to be funny, and I think there's a time and a place perhaps for it. It's like if you've ever read Jonathan Swift. His what is it called? Modest Proposal, where he was talking about basically criticizing his government, but doing so in a way where he's talking about eating babies and just some really awful stuff. But doing it in a way that, of course, he was he wasn't advocating it, but he was kind of lampooning the world. And so I think there's a place for that, but especially given that we're trying to reach a lot of folks with the basics of what is Bitcoin and why does it exist and what is the mission of this technology. I think it's a good idea for us to reach as big an audience as we can.
It's a challenge.
It's a mix.
So many things, so many efforts right now are failing or are being put on hold because they are they're exsanguinated. They just have no lifeblood. They have no money behind their project. Look, like, we rail against Hollywood and big media all day, every day, for the content that they put out. And then when we have independent creators putting out stuff that doesn't have the monetary backing of big Hollywood and all that investment and big bank money, we don't take the time to drop $5 in the hat occasionally. And so the projects just sort of, they die on the vine, and it's sad. I'm lucky to have the supporters that we have on Anarchast and Decentralization. They go out of their way to toss $5 or $20 in the hat every month, and that motivates me and enables me to buy the hardware I need and to continue devoting the time that I have available to creating content on this channel and content on the Decentralization channel, where we do lots of nerdy debates and philosophical conversations. I will never have investors for that type of thing. Like, it's just not a thing that ever will get invested. I am invested in by the people that watch it. I was just preparing like a revamp of our website to try and attract some more supporters than we have now, to try and ramp things up to the next. Like, the mathematics of scale with projects like this are so powerful. If 20% of the people that watch my content put $10 in the hat every month, I could do this full time for the rest of my life, pretty much. 20, and that's, I'm only talking about a few hundred people, like a couple hundred people. For your project, I don't know what your targets were. I know that you raised a lot of money in the beginning, and you guys did pretty well for a while, right? I don't know about a lot of money, but then like you said, you're at this point where now it's kind of drying up, and if you enjoyed the cartoon, go put $10 in their hat, guys. Like, if you enjoy these projects, don't wait for them to go get big money from Disney.
Yeah, it's not happening.
Yeah,
they're not going to give us the money. Yeah,
and you don't want it to happen. You don't want Disney's influence on your show, right?
No, and what should be more and more obvious to, and especially your station and your audience. So I'm sure they're all aware, but there's 6 big media companies that control all the media in the United States, and these companies are in bed with the government and all of the evil entities and folk that we are really essentially in a war against in a way. So yeah, they're not going to contribute to the end of their empire, which is, building Bitcoin and building content to explain it and get it out to the world is directly a threat to these folks and to their paradigm and to their rent-seeking businesses and to the whole giant house of cards. So it makes sense. They're not going to support us. We have to support one another. To your point, and it's really true, and I'm culpable of this as well, but I think we've all become, accustomed to and a bit lazy when it comes to, content that we consume, because it's generally been free or very, very inexpensive. If you go on these big platforms, Netflix, about $10 a month, not a big deal for most people. And, when we're seeing censorship more and more, I think really the answer has got to be that we have to disconnect, as sad as that is, and as frustrating as it is. But, for me, it's like, well, it's convenient to use Amazon, but I need to stop using that company and stop giving them my business, because they are actively building a world that is antithetical to my beliefs and to the world I want to live in. And so we really need to, kind of get off our butts and be proactive about how we spend our money. I was buying some steaks the other night, and I ended up going to a local farm where they, have their own farm raised cattle, and they butcher them and they sell them right there. And I probably paid 20% more than I would have if I'd gone to the local Kroger, and we need to be willing to pay that 20% more again and again. I think if we want to get the world moving in the direction that we would like to see it move in, because the danger that we're obviously seeing with all of these giant monopolistic businesses is that, if they decide that they don't like what you think, it's apparently okay in this country now for them to deplatform, deperson you, and just remove you. And whether that's, hey, you can't run your website anymore because AWS has shut you off, or or a payment processor will no longer allow you to receive payments. Again and again, we're seeing this happen. But here's the thing: the good news, the way I see it, is we live in very interesting times, and why not, instead of kind of bitching and moaning about it, why not step up, everyone watching this, and find a way to get involved with building a better future? We have the tools, and we are building the tools to do this. Between Bitcoin and other technologies like Signal and Telegram and a few others, there are ways to get around the censorship. And, we're not to the point where this is easy for average people to do. So it does take a little bit of work. But what's the alternative? We're going to end up in a, increasingly dystopian nightmare where we have social credit scores, and Big Brother tells us what we can say and what we can't say, and who we can talk to and who we can't talk to, and that we have to wear masks when we go places, and that just the litany of insanity from 2020 is really mind-blowing. And I knew the world was a messed up, crazy place, but it really checked me to see how quickly people just got in line for this nightmare.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought that up. It reminded me of something I forgot to do in the top of the stream, which was sort of announce that we have a new Mastodon server that I am sort of bankrolling for now, and I'm hoping that people will find it useful enough to support, like all the other projects I'm doing. We have a new Mastodon server. It's called voluntary.world. It's going to be, for those of you that don't know, Mastodon is a Twitter alternative that is decentralized. Anybody can run their own server, and you can talk to anybody on anybody else's server with an account on your own. So this is called, let me hide it so people can see it. This is called Voluntary World, voluntary.world. Right now, it's invitation only because it's brand new. We just got the server set up, and I'm going to go ahead and post an invite link in chat. It's only good for 5 signups, but so the first 5 of you that use it will get to have accounts on the new server, and then we'll open it up maybe in a week or two. Also, and if you don't make it in the first 5 to use this link, go bug Jeff Berwick on Twitter. He has a link for a lot more signups. So anyway, sorry for that interruption. It was just a good moment to talk about alternative communication methods. We also run a Matrix server, which is like a decentralized end-to-end encrypted Discord for people that are familiar with Discord. Like, I've really been trying to embrace and put my money. This is kind of the theme of our show so far. I'm putting my money and resources behind the change that I want to see in the world, and I hope you guys do as well. Copblock in the comments, Copblock Hot Springs says are we talking about money or currency? He's role playing Peter Schiff for the remainder of the show. So I look forward to seeing Copblock channel Peter Schiff. He's having a bad time lately on Twitter. A lot of people have been tagging him.
Yeah, poor Peter. He's lost, I think. It's too bad. Either that or he's trolling us massively and he's sitting on, a big pile, but I doubt it. I think he's just lost. But yeah, look, our ancestors, many of us who live in this country, our ancestors, left an oppressive nation of one variety or another, right? Came to this land, risked their lives, moved out into the wilderness and built a home for freedom because they wanted to build a better life for themselves. And, our generation is too lazy to figure out how to use Mastodon. It's just, come on, people, let's aim a little higher here.
There are people that actively do not want, and they'll even tell you to your face, like, I don't want to learn anything new.
Right.
That hurts my soul when I hear it, because we need new things right now to get away from the old, terrible, sick things.
We do, yeah. So that's cool about Mastodon. I look forward to trying to join up on your server at some point. I actually have an account already on the Bitcoin Hackers, I think it is what it's called, but the Mastodon for them. And so there's good technologies that are being rolled out, that are being developed. I think ultimately I'm hopeful and I'm optimistic. I think if anything, people have all sorts of opinions about Donald Trump, but I think the one thing that I think for sure is a big positive of his 4 years in office is that he made a pretty strong concerted effort to point out that the media is by and large a giant, fake news, or however he says it. It's completely controlled, and to listen seriously to anything these people say, you got to have, you've got to have been lobotomized or just totally asleep or something. And so that's good. I think a lot of Americans are waking up. My hope is that the sort of MAGA crowd is going to realize that they need to embrace Bitcoin. And I think many of them are going to be more open to these sorts of ideas than they've ever been, because, barring some miracle on, Wednesday? And, you've got the Q folks who are completely sold on this idea that Trump is going to arrest all these people and so on and so forth. This is my take. It's like, I'm praying he does. I really am. I think there's no doubt that these folks, by and large, are criminal and should be arrested and tried with treason and high crimes and, all sorts of things, war crimes. But my life so far has shown me that government has consistently been a disappointment across the board. And so for something of this degree to happen, it really would be a miracle. And I mean, like, God literally got it done. And so could it happen? Sure. I think it's possible. I think, if you read the Old Testament, there's some crazy stories in there that I believe happened, with angels just massacring tens of thousands of soldiers, just boom. So, could the entire Congress just, could an angel of death just smite them all?
You're going to get my channel taken off YouTube is what you're going to do.
No, I'm not calling for any humans to do it. I'm saying, this would have to be a divine. But
honestly, like, after what we've seen the past week with Amazon and Twitter and Facebook, and like, I really I don't want to be on these websites anymore. I would delete Disenthrall and Anarchast and all my Twitter and Facebook accounts, like, right now, if I wasn't still trying to reach the audience out there on those platforms. Like, I feel like I'm chained to them. So yeah, The responsible thing to do is to, just like we're talking about putting your resources where your principles are and putting your resources behind the things you want to succeed, withdraw your resources from the things that deserve to no longer exist.
Right.
Would be a good message there, right? But I want you to challenge. I want you to set me straight on Bitcoin. And I've had the same conversation like with two prior guests over the past 9 months that I've been hosting Anarchast. Yeah, we're coming up on a year, folks. We're almost at 40 episodes. This has been a great time. I've challenged people on this before, and I really have not been I don't feel like I've been successfully challenged or satisfied with the answers. I'm pretty negative on Bitcoin, and I want you to try setting me straight. I see it as a Windows Vista era version 1 of the technology. There's so much innovation in the other coins. There's so much more important features like privacy and Monero type coins, or Pirate Coin is what I just heard of recently. There's the failings, the things that are missing in Bitcoin are allowing the big financial institutions and the governments to sink their claws into it and get regulations and get IRS tracking and all this stuff on it. It makes me wonder. It makes me think that at some point there's going to be an eye-opening to the realities of the deficiencies of Bitcoin, and the rug's going to get yanked out from under it, and people are going to go find these other coins. Like there are people that were born now when after Bitcoin was released to the world that are adults, and so they have never been in a world without cryptocurrency, and they have grown up in a world with alternative currencies, and at some point that will be the majority of humans, and it won't be a weird thing to look at another coin besides Bitcoin. Like I think the older people, they only know what Bitcoin is. They don't even know what an altcoin is. And that's going to fade away. And I wonder if at some point there's just going to be a big shift to newer technology, better technology. That would be my challenge. Set me straight, please.
Yeah, well, so a good pushback on that would be that the internet, for example, what is it? HTTP. What's the protocol that hasn't been upgraded? I'm blanking on the name of it right now, but I think it might be HTTP. But there's multiple. You've got TCP/IP, you've got HTTP, you've got SMTP. There are better versions of all of these protocols that are faster and more efficient, and so on and so forth. But they're not being used, and the reason is because as the internet was built out, browsers and software and hardware and all sorts of things were developed using these protocols. And so even if a better technology came along, supposedly better, it was too difficult to just rip it out and replace, with this new version. And so I think that's basically what has happened and why Bitcoin is ultimately going to win. But even more than that, I would also say Bitcoin is the only cryptocurrency with a credible monetary policy. And what I mean by that is there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin. And we know this because to try to change the protocol is next to impossible at this point. We may get one more soft fork with a few small upgrades, but besides that, it's basically already ossifying. It's being set in stone, and that's a good thing because it means that even if someone wants to increase the monetary supply to 42 million. It's never going to happen. You'd have to convince tens of thousands of node operators and miners to switch over to that, to voluntarily upgrade to that, inflationary version. And so it's not going to happen. And so that to me is the most important aspect of all this is, I think where I would say perhaps you and others get, pulled in the wrong direction is that people believe that this is first and foremost a about the technology and about all of these little, I guess you could say, gimmicky things about block times and the speed and the number of transactions and so on. Ultimately, I see that the fundamental value proposition of Bitcoin is that it is a replacement for central banking. And in other words, it is a new monetary system. It's a new monetary system that, in order for people to adopt it globally in a massive way, they have to believe that it actually will maintain its monetary policy. And so, for, let's say, Ethereum, you've got Vitalik, right? And you've got a handful of other guys, but it's kind of like a little fiefdom that he runs, and if he wants to change it, he can. And there's very few nodes that are even in operation for Ethereum, and it's becoming increasingly centralized because, it's bad architecture, and they don't understand how to build web technology that scales up. So you have centralization of miners, and the whole thing is a dumpster fire, in my opinion. And then you look at Monero. I think Monero, of all of the other altcoins, is perhaps one of the more interesting ones. I think its ethos is closer to Bitcoin in terms of, kind of bottom up and a lot of independent people building it and using it. But I actually think that the fact that Bitcoin's supply is auditable, that you can actually easily confirm how many Bitcoin exist, is really important. And so, with Monero, you're basically trusting some really complex moon math that very few people on Earth even understand, to be able to trust that this thing is actually finite. And so, if there's an inflation bug, there's really no way to know until, it's too late. And so I don't really trust Monero for that reason. I don't trust it because it's too complex for me to really understand it. And so I think Bitcoin strikes that right balance. And yes, like some governments are going to try to censor transactions and things, that's inevitable with Bitcoin, and that's it's a challenge. But even that is something that's being addressed with Lightning Network. So it's possible now with Bitcoin to send transactions to anyone on the planet using Lightning, and to do that in a way that you basically have total privacy in who you're paying, and it's a Tor onion routed mechanism that sends these transactions. So if you trust Tor and some of these internet privacy tools, then you can also trust that Bitcoin's Lightning Network is going to provide that privacy. So so I think getting the monetary policy right is the most important and foundational and fundamental aspect of any cryptocurrency. Bitcoin, I think, has far and away proven that it has that credible policy in place. And, and it's got, kind of like I was mentioning with TCP/IP and all these other protocols, it's just becoming so built in to hardware and software. It's becoming ubiquitous. And as you said, if you talk to older generations, Gen X and above, they've never heard of anything except for Bitcoin. And that's important because those folks are starting to buy Bitcoin, and they're not buying Ethereum or Monero or these other things. They're buying Bitcoin. Look, it's possible in a decade or two that maybe some insanely good technology is going to come along, and I don't know though. It's very difficult to get people to change and to move over to something better. And it would really have to, in my mind, it would have to be 10 times better than Bitcoin for people to switch to it. And I just don't really see that happening. So I'm pretty confident that Bitcoin is going to be the winner.
My bar is much lower. I just want it to be better than PayPal. Like I'll use it right now if it's not better than, it's only better than PayPal in that no one can freeze my account. But the government has full access to being able to determine what Bitcoin I have in most circumstances, unless I go to extreme measures to keep it private. They can just, come and throw me in a cage until I give them my Bitcoin because they know I have it. They can prove it. Whereas, well,
no, that's not. I don't think that's true. Look, I mean, companies. First of all, I think Bitcoiners have been a little, coy in the sense that if you want, kind of like Trojan horse, if you want the government to leave you alone, then you tell them, yeah, you can track this stuff. It's safe. It's fine. And then you've got, of course, companies like Chain Analysis. There's a few of these people out here doing this thing. Look, if you have Bitcoin and you send it, if you hop it to two different, like you get it from an exchange and you hop it 2 times, to another wallet, another address, and then to another address, who's going to be able to prove that that's your Bitcoin? There's no way to prove it. So, all you have to say is, I sold that Bitcoin. I don't have it anymore. What are they going to do? No. So look, I mean, it's just not true that for most people, by and large, there's really not a lot of risk in that regard, especially if you just follow some practices like I just mentioned. And use, BIP32, so you're not reusing addresses. I think the privacy part is way overblown. I mean, I think, look, if you're a high-profile person and you've got, many, many millions of dollars in Bitcoin, maybe watch your back a little more. But for small players, I don't think it's an issue.
I think I agree with that statement, but it also brings up the problem that the smaller players, like, somebody donated $20 in Bitcoin to the show. It cost me $5 to move that Bitcoin. I don't want anything to do with that. I can't use that. I would have to just keep that wallet, safe somewhere until the technology was iterated by somebody to the point where I could actually move the money around without paying 25% of it in fees. That would be my last challenge to you.
if you're receiving $20 worth of Bitcoin, assuming that it's being sent to a wallet where you control multiple addresses, then you're not going to just be spending that one $20 transaction. You're going to be controlling many addresses, and you're going to be able to consolidate all those UTXOs from multiple addresses into one, if you like. So I mean, that's just not really an accurate argument, I would say. But I mean, in the end, Bitcoin is first and foremost a replacement for the central banking system. And so in that sense, it is about storing value over long periods of time, and protecting yourself from inflation. I would look at gold. I would look at Bitcoin like people look at gold. If you're buying gold, you're not buying it to go transact down at the local store. You're buying it to hold your value over the next 3 to 5, 10 years. That is how you should view Bitcoin. And I think, unfortunately, Roger Ver and some folks in that camp, I believe, really got confused because they saw that Bitcoin was marketed, in the white paper, it's called a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. When Satoshi was writing about cash, he was talking about a bearer instrument. That's what he was meaning when he used that term. Bitcoin was not designed to be some replacement for PayPal or quick and easy, cheap payments. That's not the point of it. Now, I think it's going to get there with Lightning Network. You can set up Lightning. It's still early. It's not easy to use. But, with a couple hours of time today, going on some forums, you could get set up with a Lightning, node, and you could receive Bitcoin Lightning payments. And those are basically free in terms of transaction fee and instant. So, these things are going to happen with Bitcoin, but the whole payment thing, to me, misses it. The point of Bitcoin is that it's a replacement for the entire monetary system. So that's, think of it like digital gold. That's the bottom line. That's how I would be viewing it. And, the in and out cost, if you're buying gold, is 5-6%, round trip. You'll probably pay between the fee to buy it and the fee to sell it. So, when you compare that to Bitcoin, I mean, even a $5 fee is nothing.
So it's less money and more an investment.
It is money. It's just in bootstrapping itself from being nothing to being ultimately the global reserve currency and probably the de facto global currency for everything when it's ultimately successful. It'll be as ubiquitous as the internet. So people will, just like they pick up their phone and use the internet and don't think about it, they'll be using Bitcoin to pay people and to do all sorts of things. And those, second and third layer solutions like Lightning Network will take care of those smaller transactions. But fundamentally, Bitcoin is, it's money, but to get to the point of being everyday money, it first has to become a store of value, because that's really where money was broken. I mean, it's easy using cash or using credit cards or debit cards. Getting value across space is pretty easy now in these days that we live in. Money's digital, right? So it's not that Bitcoin solved that problem of sending value across space. It fixed the problem of saving value across time, and that's really why it's existing and why it's growing and why it's succeeding, because it beats every other money hands down in terms of being able to store your value across space and time, and ultimately to move it across space as well, because you don't have to get permission from anyone. You don't have a third party that can tell you who you can or cannot pay. So it wins in that regard, of course. But the most important aspect of it is that it's a purely scarce, absolutely scarce digital asset that has a credible policy and that is built out big enough at this point in terms of adoption and number of users that it's not going to change. And so we can trust the monetary policy. And because we can trust the monetary policy, to me, it's like I didn't come up with this, but I love the analogy. It's like a monetary black hole. It is the heaviest, it's the best, heaviest money that exists. And it's going to continue to suck the value from every other store of value, every other type of money, until it is the only money on Earth, basically. I think that's where we're headed.
Cool. Okay, let's talk about your recent, I guess not so recent, but your current company that you are working with. You created it? Are you a founder? Or are you?
Yeah, I am. So the quick story of CoinCube is that I actually used this brand for a different project that I had launched in 2015. This was back when I was, I guess, a multi-coiner, or some people would say shit coiner. Pardon my French. And so I was building software to basically trade cryptocurrencies on exchanges. And, it was like a software as a service sort of, create a crypto index. And, I sort of like I came back to Jesus. I had a point of coming back to Bitcoin where I realized that I had wandered far from my true love, from my first love, and was really convinced ultimately that, and look, I think everyone needs to follow whatever rabbit hole they whatever path they need to follow. But for me, I found that Bitcoin really far and away is the winner, and I believe that firmly now. And so I shut down that business and took some time off, was working on the show. And then one day, just kind of a few things happened. I have an older brother who, was always into precious metals, and I'd been for years and years asking him to buy Bitcoin, just get a little bit of Bitcoin, get a little bit. He never listened to me. And then, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago, we were having a conversation and something changed. And all of a sudden he was interested in buying Bitcoin. And not only that, but he was interested in selling perhaps some of his silver to buy Bitcoin. And, so he's Gen X age. And so this really struck me as being, I think, perhaps indicative of kind of a broader sentiment change. And then I started noticing people on Twitter talking about selling their precious metals to buy Bitcoin. And so that was the beginning of me realizing that, I worked prior to Bitcoin from 2010 to 14. I actually worked for Peter Schiff. I was a precious metals broker in New York with his company. So I have a background in, precious metals and know that industry and know some of the big players and the wholesalers and stuff. So I realized, well, if people are looking to sell their precious metals to buy Bitcoin, then, perhaps I can help some people do that. And I have a background in both of these fields. So that was the beginning of kind of rebooting CoinCube. And I thought about using different names and bought some other domains, but ended up realizing that, or deciding that, I've already got this brand, and I've got, Twitter and Facebook, and I've got all of these things already set up. And it's a good enough sounding brand and whatever. And so I just felt like it was a smart move to just take that brand and rebuild it. So that's basically what I'm doing. But right now, our two offerings are, and I'm doing this with my dad, who's retired, but I'm kind of bringing him back. He was a financial advisor for about 31 years, I believe. But he's gotten into Bitcoin a little bit. I've pushed him into it, I should say. But he's learning and growing, and it's been good. So he's involved, and so we're doing Bitcoin, gold and silver to Bitcoin transactions, and then we're also doing Bitcoin IRA accounts. And so for those listening who aren't familiar with this concept, basically, if you've had a job where you were earning a savings account, a 401k account, where you were contributing to a 401k, and you quit that job, you can roll that into an IRA, an individual retirement account. You can also set up an IRA on your own and make contributions to it. And it's several thousand. I think it's 6 to 7, if I remember right, thousand per year. I'd have to double check that number. Something like that is the contribution limit. But bottom line is you can buy Bitcoin in an IRA. And so we are partnering with an IRA custodian called Kingdom Trust. They've been around for a decade. They're good Christian people out of Kentucky. They've done gold IRAs for a long time. That's how I know of them. But they started doing Bitcoin IRAs in 2015. And they've actually partnered with Fidelity, which of course is a very big name in investing. And so the Bitcoin can be held with Fidelity. Or the better alternative, or the better option I would be encouraging people to pursue, is actually you can set up an LLC that is owned by your IRA account. And then that LLC can purchase almost anything you want: real estate, gold, and also Bitcoin. So doing it through that LLC structure, you can set up an LLC that's owned by your IRA, buy Bitcoin, and then actually take delivery of it, hold the private keys, and have your own Bitcoin for your retirement outside of the hands of anyone, any government, et cetera. And so that's really the optimal solution, although the Fidelity one is a little bit simpler to get set up. But yeah, so we're doing those accounts. I've already got some folks signed up, and looks like we're going to be a good source of business for us. And I'm real excited about it because I think there's going to be a lot of folks that are Gen X and older who have funds in IRAs, and who are realizing that the world is getting increasingly crazy, and they need to insulate themselves from what the government has done and will continue to do. The inflation in 2020 was just absolutely crazy. I think I calculated it out. It was something like they increased the M1 number by 64%, just a huge amount of inflation. And so we're heading, sadly, I think, especially if Biden is the guy, they'll probably off him and it'll be Kamala, but they'll 25th Amendment the guy and, get rid of him. But either way, they're going to print, more money than we can imagine. And it's just going to get increasingly Zimbabwe-esque in this country. So I'm happy to help people.
I'm working on the audio. Awesome, and I have tons of questions, and I want to kind of walk through it. I was yeah. just to reinforce that point. I'm recording the audiobook for Jeff Berwick's the controlled demolition of the American Empire book that he released recently. Audiobook is hopefully coming soon. And one of the points that it made in the book was how something like 30%, I want to say 30% of US dollars in existence today were created or printed in the last year and a half or something like that. Like, it is just wild, like wanton printing of money happening right now. Just and we're not going to feel it for 4 years or so when the inflation, when the market numbers start to compensate for the crazy inflation happening right now. So investment vehicles like this might be something you could look into. And the last thing I'll say before I start hitting you with questions is that,
sure,
I want to be clear to the audience. We are not telling you what to do with your money. We are telling you what you can do with your money. You need to do your own research. You need to make your own decisions. Think for yourself. This channel and all of my channels are always about nothing more than trying to get you to think for yourself and leading yourself. So that is my disclaimer for financial talks. Let's get into it. I want to step in. I want to step through it. I want to step through it. So for people that don't know, so I think most people know what a 401k is. Oftentimes your employer will do, like contribution matching to your 401k. So out of every paycheck, if you put in $200, they'll put in $200 or something like that, just depending on, what deal you have with your employer. So you build up this money that you don't pay taxes on in a 401k. And again, correct me if I get any of this wrong.
That's correct.
So you build up a balance that is hopefully being invested by whatever company they have managing your 401k for you, and is hopefully growing by some percent a year. And there are severe penalties if you withdraw your 401k money before you retire. Not only do you pay taxes on it, but I think there's just a flat percentage. Is it just like a massive percentage tax that you pay if you withdraw before you retire? Is that what it is, or how does that work?
I think it's been a while since I looked at that number, but I believe it's around 10% on top of whatever your regular income tax would be. And so the idea is if you are earning quite a bit today, you're going to be in a higher tax bracket. So you're going to be paying that higher tax bracket if you withdraw, in addition to the penalty. So they really are trying to discourage you from withdrawing. And the idea is once you retire, your income is lower, so you're in a lower tax bracket. And so then when you're taking withdrawals, you're going to be paying less tax. And so that's the traditional IRA or 401k. You can also set up something called a Roth IRA. And this is a bit different. This is where you actually pay the tax up front on the money. And then supposedly the government is going to let you take that out when you retire without paying any tax on the gains or anything that happens from then on. So, when you look at Bitcoin as an option, the Roth actually is more, appealing given the potential insane upside that you might see on that Bitcoin. But then again, you have to trust that the government's actually going to follow through on their promise and keep it. And of course, who knows if that'll happen. But yeah, so there's two kind of flavors to these types of accounts, but you're all right on everything you've said so far. Yeah.
Okay. So the next step is that we're talking about IRAs, which are individual retirement accounts, I think is what they stand for. And you can open one pretty much anytime you want, and you can start putting money away. And when you put money into an IRA, you've already been taxed on it, right? So what benefit is the IRA? What am I misunderstanding? I'm not as familiar with them.
Yeah, well, normally the way you would set it up is if you're self-employed, then it's called a self-employed pension IRA, SEP IRA. And so the way that works is you would make pre-tax contributions to the IRA. But you do that sort of like, it's your own little business and you're setting up your own little retirement. More times than not, it'll be folks that have IRA accounts because they had a former job with a 401k, and when they retired or they left that job or they, changed careers, whatever, they had that 401k account. And at that point, they decided to roll it into an IRA. So that is tax-free. It's essentially moving it from an account where your former employer was involved and they had someone who was overseeing the investment of that money to an account where you can do the investing on your own. That's basically what an IRA allows you to do, is to make the decisions. Self-directed is typically how these are set up. And but yeah, so legally and tax-wise, it's sort of like a sideways move, goes from this one tax sheltered sort of vehicle to this other one, but the government's going to view them more or less as analogous, and so you don't pay any tax if you do that.
Okay, and so this is a common thing I've heard of people doing quite frequently. They sort of roll, like if you have multiple employers over a long period of time, you can just start rolling them all over time into a single IRA that you can control. That makes sense.
Right. As long as you're no longer working with that company, that's the caveat.
Okay. Is there some kind of barrier that would prevent an individual from purchasing Bitcoin with the pre-tax money and having that be part of the IRA? I mean, like, what are the barriers to this sort of benefit of the service that you're providing people? Just managing the whole process, doing the tax filings, or what?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. So if you're talking about a SEP IRA where you're self-employed and you set this up, for most folks, they're probably going to want to have an accountant or someone help them make sure they're doing everything correctly. But yeah, bottom line is they could take pre-tax income into their business and funnel it into this SEP IRA account and buy whatever they want, and they're not going to pay tax on it today or any time in the future, as long as they keep it in that account. And then when they retire, they're going to pay whatever that tax rate is at that point, assuming their income's lower, they have a lower tax bracket, et cetera. And that's the basic idea.
And what about like capital gains? Do you pay capital gains on any assets that the IRA holds over, like when you cash it out later, or how does that work?
Yeah, so you don't pay any capital gains, and you can trade and buy and sell into things, and that's all tax free. So the only time you're going to worry about paying any tax is when you take a contribution in the future, and ideally once you were retired.
Okay,
and then it's going to be at your income tax level at that point.
So if for no other reason than avoiding capital gains, does it make it worth it to use that strategy, in your opinion? Like yeah. I mean, if you're self-employed and you don't have an IRA, you should set one up. It's a smart strategy to start building up some investment that is more or less protected from a lot of the negativity that you're going to experience outside of that. So okay. And so CoinCube, I have your website pulled up here. I'll kind of throw it up here. It says that your main two offerings are Bitcoin IRAs and Bitcoin to bullion to Bitcoin. So exactly what would you do for me if I signed up with you today to help me out with a Bitcoin IRA? What kind of services do you offer?
Yeah, so the process is pretty simple. We would get you set up with Kingdom Trust. So they're the actual custodian that is legally responsible for administering your IRA account for you. And so that's part of the issue, or part of what you need to understand about IRAs is, outside of doing the LLC structure that I mentioned, generally it's not possible for you to hold the assets of the IRA yourself. There has to be a third party that's involved. Now, this LLC route is a way to kind of legally get around that, and it's a bit of a loophole. But generally, most folks will have an IRA custodian, and that custodian will, hold the stocks or the gold or whatever for them on behalf of them. And there's typically a fee that you will pay, so that's important to know. I mean, it depends on the type of account, but you might pay 1% a year, something like that is perhaps what an IRA custodian will charge. That's what they charge, for example, with Kingdom, with Bitcoin IRAs at least. And then, of course, there's the fee to buy Bitcoin, and that's going to be a few percent. So they take a percentage, 1%, and then I'm going to be charging my clients 2%. So it's like a 3% on the front end and 1% annual is what you're going to be paying in terms of fees. If you set up an LLC, it's going to be a little different than that, and it would be a little bit lower, but there's a little more paperwork involved to get that set up. So there's kind of pros and cons. But yeah, open an account with Kingdom Trust. They've got some online forms to fill out. You could do that in 10, 15 minutes. Yeah, they're going to need your driver's license, social security number, a few things like that. Once that account's opened, they're going to send you a form to transfer assets from your existing 401k or IRA to this new account. And that takes a couple days to a week, let's say, typically. And then once that's done, we would communicate, and basically I'm the broker that would be assigned to that account. So if you want to buy or sell, you just let me know what you want to do, when you want to do it. It's ultimately self-directed, so it's totally up to the IRA account holder what happens. But my hope is that I can be a resource and someone with knowledge and experience in these industries to be a good guide and to help people make good decisions. And that's basically it. So you buy and sell when you want to, and you just would communicate with me to do those trades for you, and that's pretty much it. And then you just are holding it for the long term. And I guess the one thing to point out also that's to keep in mind is, when you set up an account like this, that money is locked in. So, as you mentioned before, there's a penalty for early withdrawal. And so that's the one potential negative caveat that you do need to consider. It's not quite as liquid as if, you just have Bitcoin in your own personal wallet. If you're thinking about buying real estate or something else, but then again, I mean, there's always pros and cons to these things. So it's good to be, saving for a rainy day and for long term. So, but that's the basic idea.
Are you acting as a broker? Like, are you going to be doing trades for people, Bitcoin trades for people? Are you going to be giving like trade advice, like when's a good time to get in and get out and sort of ride the waves? Or are you just sort of, pushing the buttons that the customers tell you to push? How does that work?
So my general advice is going to be to buy and hold and not try to time the market. With that being said, I could see some customers who perhaps will, see the price go up some 10x, let's say, multiple, and feel like they want to take some off the table. And if that's where they're at, I'm happy to help do that for them. And I've kind of ridden these waves enough that I could probably give them some decent ideas about, what I think is going to happen. But there's always risk in trying to time markets. And so I generally, most folks who have tried to trade Bitcoin have lost in the long term. Like, they would have been much better off if they just held the Bitcoin they originally bought. So that's really my honest advice, is to not try to get too fancy with trading, but just to hold. So, in the end, it's a pretty simple service. There's not a ton to it, but a lot of folks try to make money by being financial intermediaries, where they sell that they've got this special knowledge and they try to convince people to pay them for it. And I just, my special knowledge is Bitcoin is the best investment opportunity of your lifetime. And if you miss out on it, it's going to be a big shame. And, I've been in this industry. I've been in Bitcoin now for 6 years. I've seen a lot. I know how things go. And, I've read a lot of Austrian economics, and I think I understand the fundamentals of money and why Bitcoin is working and why it will continue to work. So, that's what I have to offer, is hopefully like a steady hand, good advice, and ultimately just helping people to steer some of their assets, in this direction. And for baby boomers and Gen X age folks, my advice is take 5-10% of your retirement account, put it into Bitcoin, and you are either going to see, the best returns of your life, or Bitcoin will fail and you'll lose that percentage. I think the odds that Bitcoin fails now are maybe 10% chance that it'll fail and 90% chance that it'll succeed, honestly. That's, I think, where we are. But there's still some risk. Obviously, there's, the future's uncertain. So I wouldn't advise, selling your home or risking your life savings, especially if you're getting more, elevated in years. But to take a piece of, as I mentioned for the top of this call, or this video, even if you'd put $100 in Bitcoin 10 years ago, you'd be sitting on 3.5 million today. And I think that same kind of return upside exists for Bitcoin. If it replaces all global money, it's going to be 5 million at least per Bitcoin. And so that's 100x plus from where we are today. That's crazy upside. So don't miss it.
All right. So the other service offering is bullion to Bitcoin. I'm assuming that means taking people's gold and handing them Bitcoin in exchange. Can you tell us about your service there?
Yeah. So that is a little more complex in the sense that, you've got to actually box up your precious metals and ship them to a wholesaler. But basically, I looked around in the market and realized that there's no one yet that's actually trying to make this easy for people. So if you were working on your own, you would have to contact a precious metals dealer, ship them your gold. They're going to send you a bank wire transfer. Then you're going to have to take that transfer and wire it to a Bitcoin brokerage company and set up an account and go through a big process and then get your Bitcoin. So basically, I'm trying to cut at least one of those middlemen out. And so the idea is folks can, basically sell to us. We're using wholesalers. So we're going to have you ship, you box up your metals, you go to the United States Postal Service, you can ship, I think it's up to $50,000 per package insurance. So you buy insurance, obviously, on these packages, and you get them shipped to a warehouse address that we'll give you with one of the wholesalers we work with. Once that Bitcoin arrives, they send us the payment to our bank account. We buy the Bitcoin and we send it to you. And so that's basically what we're offering. but hopefully giving people a little bit better service and lower fees than having to go through, multiple steps. We're kind of cutting one of those out is what we're doing. So
what kind of KYC is involved in selling your gold to a wholesaler?
So the good thing about the way we're set up is we are not a financial, we're not a money transmitter. We're not a bank. You're not going to have an account with us. This is a transactional deal. And so basically you're selling us one commodity for another commodity. And when we structure it that way, we really don't need to know much about the person who's selling to us. I mean, I need to be able to contact you and I need to be able to get you your Bitcoin. But besides that, the caveat is if you're selling a kilo or more of gold, and I think it's 1,000 ounces, 1,000 ounces of silver or more, then you are going to be issued a tax form, basically to pay your capital gains on that metal. But that's really more about the government wanting to get their cut of their pound of flesh from you than it is about them caring really what you've done with that money. So aside from a tax form that may or may not need to be issued to you, there's really not much that my business needs to hold in terms of customers' information.
I saved this topic for the last because I think it should be the atomic bomb in the video for those of you that are having challenges with purchasing Bitcoin without KYC. This is a potential avenue for that. And correct me if I'm wrong, please, definitely correct me if I'm wrong. But purchasing, if you've held precious metals and you're selling them, you can transfer that hopefully in an anonymous way into Bitcoin. Which would give you Bitcoin that your name was not attached to, which is a pretty powerful thing right now in the modern day and age. Do you have any thoughts on just kind of that general strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a reason why gold has been popular in that it is a money that can be transacted. You can walk into a coin dealer and sell some gold for cash and walk out the door, and no one is going to know about that. That is the kind of world we need to live in. There's no reason for governments to be involved in our private affairs and our money. And so, going from Bitcoin to gold is, I think, perhaps one of the few instances where you're not going to be running into these KYC walled garden messes that you're going to find on most exchanges. Now, the challenge, of course, with this product offering is convincing gold and silver bugs that maybe they need to take some of their metals and sell them. And, I'm just going to be, I guess, very honest here and say that I think gold and silver are being demonetized, and mostly because Bitcoin is a superior money. And so, back when I was a precious metals broker, I really believed that gold was the best money out there, and that eventually, if all things go well, we're going to be back to a gold standard someday. Somehow we're going to get back there. When Bitcoin dropped into the scene, and when I finally started paying attention in 2013, I realized that if you have two competing monies and they're both non-government, in other words, the governments aren't coercing people to use gold. They don't want people to use gold, and they've made it very difficult. And they tax you on it. And they've also, if you kind of dig into the rabbit hole with the gold market, you find out that there's been quite a bit of manipulation over the years where governments and big bullion banks have, I believe, conspired. And there's court cases and things. So this isn't me making things up. This is history at this point. JP Morgan, for example, got into a big deal with manipulating the silver market. I think it was around 2013, if I remember right. But bottom line, these governments have been manipulating precious metals for a long time. And what I mean by that is, as the price of these assets was rising, and as people were kind of fleeing to them to hopefully escape inflation, they would come in and they would use massive paper shorts and derivatives, and they would set up, GLD and these other ETF funds, And in the prospectus of these funds, they're very opaque, and essentially they're allowed to loan out the metals, rehypothecate is what that's called. They can rehypothecate, and they can do all sorts of funny business where at the end of the day, no one really knows how much gold is backing these funds. And the same is true for central banks in terms of how much gold they hold. Fort Knox, for example, in the United States has not been audited, I think, since like the 1950s or 60s. And, so that market is extremely opaque. It's very difficult to see into it, to see what's actually happening. And that all works in favor of these central banks and the business model they have. And so they've been able to suppress the price of these assets as they rise. They come in, naked shorting and using huge derivative and paper contracts to suppress and push the price down and basically wipe out and kind of push the air out of the room, if you will, for people who have been buying and holding these assets. And so Bitcoin came along, and to me, the realization that I had pretty early on in, I think, 2013 or 14 was Bitcoin offers all of the benefit of gold in terms of being able to escape this broken system, but it cannot be manipulated and controlled and coerced like the precious metal markets. Because with Bitcoin, you can take settlement and delivery immediately of your Bitcoin from an exchange when you buy it. And that's really why gold doesn't work, is because it's centralized in these big vaults. And so if people never take delivery, and many never do, then it's all just a bunch of paper and air that's built up on top of it. And that leverage is able to push around this very small amount of actual metal, because it's many, many multiples of that in paper. So Bitcoin doesn't have that problem, and it never will, as long as Bitcoiners take their Bitcoin off of exchanges. And thankfully, the trend, especially in the last year, has been divestment of Bitcoin from exchanges, more outflows than inflows. And that's only going to continue, I think, as people wake up and understand, why would you risk your Bitcoin on an exchange with a third party where a government or some other entity may try to take it from you? So Bitcoin, to me, is really, it's the tool that we've all been waiting for those of us who are, libertarians and hard money and sound money advocates. It is the tool. And so if you're a Bitcoin, if you're a gold bug or a silver bug, my encouragement to you is, if you're not ready to give up on the dream of your silver or your gold, going to the moon, I can't convince you of that, but I could at least encourage you to maybe hedge your bets. Maybe take 10% of your gold and silver and buy Bitcoin with it. Because if I'm right and you keep holding your gold and silver and they continue to decline in value over time, as put it simply, I mean, the case in point is this: Peter Schiff supposedly, or at least outwardly, doesn't own Bitcoin, right? And he hates it. Thinks it's worthless. His son, Spencer, owns Bitcoin and is vocally in favor and a proponent of it.
I wish I was sitting there at their Thanksgiving dinner table. I bet that would have been a fun conversation.
Yeah, of course. But, it illustrates what I believe is happening, and that is that younger generations are less averse to Bitcoin for many reasons. And so the money that would have flowed into gold, for a Spencer Schiff type, is now going to flow into Bitcoin. And you extrapolate that out for 10, 20 years, and you see the baby boomers dying off and younger generations increasingly moving toward Bitcoin for many reasons. And it's going to do what I mentioned at the beginning, which is it's going to flip gold, and gold's market cap is going to be eaten up by Bitcoin. And ultimately, all money globally, I believe, will end up kind of consumed by this economic black hole. So that's where we're headed, and it's going to be amazing. So don't miss out. Get a piece of this, and get on the get your economic life preserver out and have it by your side and be ready.
Okay, we have a few questions here, and then we're going to go ahead and probably call it quits. This has been an excellent show. I've very much enjoyed chatting with you. I hope to do it again.
Me too.
Last call for questions as we get through these few that I've collected here. Crazy Pete 79 asks, how stable will a currency like Bitcoin be when normal currency will plummet? Sorry for the noob question. A better question would be, where can I get decent info on online currency? Great questions.
Can you say the first part one more time?
How stable
for me,
will a
please.
currency like Bitcoin be when normal currency will plummet?
Well, so I mean, if you're thinking about ability to purchase, a steak tomorrow, let's say, right? If the dollar goes into hyperinflation, then one steak could be hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of dollars. This sounds crazy, but this is what happens in hyperinflation. If you look at Zimbabwe, Venezuela, Argentina, those are three recent examples. So just Google, hyperinflation, Argentina, Venezuela, et cetera, and just look into these things. And you can see in this sort of scenario, the currency ultimately becomes worthless. And so in that scenario, Bitcoin could be $100 trillion. But at that point, the dollar is toilet paper. But yeah, I mean, look, Bitcoin is real money. It's the best money that exists because it's infinitely scarce. It's portable. It's divisible. It can be stored and sent easily to anyone on Earth at any time, 24/7, 365. It's like comparing snail mail, right, to email. Why did email completely replace, for the most part, people sending physical letters? Because it's faster, cheaper, better, and you have your letters forever, right? I have thousands and thousands of letters and emails from friends and family that if I had carted all that stuff around my whole life, it'd be a room full of mail to deal with. So, Bitcoin in a analogous way is just so far superior to money that it's preserving value because everyone is flocking to it, and it will continue to do that. So, yeah, I mean, the dollar's doomed. It's in the cards here. I'm not sure if I answered that question very well, but
Yeah, I think you did. Okay, a couple more here. Halel asks, are any of these IRAs regulated by any form of government? They are a creation of the government. They are nothing but regulations of the government to attempt to give you a way to avoid their tax extortion for a little bit. That's all. It's a vehicle for deferring tax extortion. Yeah.
It's like it's a patch on a retarded system to try to make it slightly less retarded, but it's all still pretty retarded. But if you are in that system, if you are earning, a wage from some company and they put money into a 401k, unless you just want to outright break the law and chance it, if you're going to try to play by the books, which a lot of folks are doing, then it makes sense to understand the rules of the game and to take advantage of them to the degree that you can. So It's definitely government thing that we're involved with here in terms of these accounts.
Our Peter Schiff role player, Copblock, asks a question. What do you need a social security number for if Bitcoin is anonymous? So I think this is the tip of the iceberg of a larger conversation about how you can acquire Bitcoin anonymously. All of the easy ways to do it certainly are linked to your identification. What would you say about that?
Yeah, I mean, Bitcoin is just software, and obviously hardware, computers that are securing it. But in terms of you, Cockblock, using Bitcoin, no, you don't need to give anyone your social security number to use Bitcoin. Now, to acquire it, increasingly more and more because of government interference and regulation, exchanges will require your social security number because the government wants to pry into everything you do so that they can try to extract every last penny from you of what they believe is what is owed to them because of their decree, right? That you must give them money because they say so. So that's all that is. But a couple other things I could throw out there. If you want to buy Bitcoin non-KYC outside of working with me with the bullion to Bitcoin option, there's BISC, BISQ. BISC is decentralized software. It's open source. I've used it, and I've never had any issues. I can't, do your own work, do your own due diligence, but so far I would say I could recommend looking into them at least. But bottom line is you can set up you can download their software and connect with other people buying and selling Bitcoin. And then you can pay them with different methods, including Zelle Pay and some other things. And there's also local Bitcoin. So there are ways to acquire Bitcoin without giving anyone your social security number. And those are, preferable ways to do it. But, it depends on how much you want to work in that direction. And as I mentioned before, I still think there's definitely plausible deniability in saying that you can take Bitcoin from an exchange, you can send it to an address, and you can hop it to 2 or 3 more addresses, and you'll pay a little bit in fees to do that. But ultimately, if you've moved your money several hops away from the exchange, it's more or less clean at that point. And look, the reason why I know this is because this is how these exchanges operate. If in other words, if you have money that was tied to like a dark market for some reason, generally speaking, the rule with these exchanges is that money needs to be separated from that tainted address by a couple hops. As long as it's a few hops away from that tainted address, they will accept it again as deposit into that exchange. They'll take the Bitcoin. So I think a lot of these things are honestly overblown, and people, you need to understand the risks and understand that, yes, potentially people could connect you to a Bitcoin address and they could de-anonymize that, and they could look into what you're doing. But, outside of big whales, I think there's very little risk for most folks in that way.
Okay. The last topic is one that I saw in the chat a couple times, and I'm just curious maybe what they mean by it, and maybe you have some insight into this. They say BTC is money, not currency. What does that mean? It sounds like a word game to me. What does that mean? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, that sounds like a word game. I mean, I think it's kind of, they're pushing in the direction of, well, it's not easy or cheap to send small, coffee payments using Bitcoin, right? So it's not easy day-to-day currency. And that's fair enough. At this point, I think that's a fair argument. Bitcoin, as I said before, is digital gold. You should be buying it and holding it for the next 5 to 10 years at least. And at some point when it, the phrase that I like is hyper-Bitcoinization. It's the idea that we get to a point where the entire system finally flips, just like, the internet used to be. No one used it. And then all of a sudden, one day you woke up and it was like, if you don't have an email address, you're a weirdo, right? So we're going to get to that point, I believe, with Bitcoin. And when we reach that point, and we'll see the technologies like Lightning Network developed out over the years, we get to that point, Bitcoin will be currency, but today it is money. And it's more important to secure your value and your savings over the course of the next decade using and storing it in real money and digital gold, as opposed to worrying about, can I spend it tomorrow on coffee? We can all go buy coffee with dollars. That's not the problem. The problem is your dollars are not going to buy you anything in a year or two. That's what we're worried about. And that's why Bitcoin matters.
Interesting. All right. Well, sir, I've really, really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks for letting me push back on the Bitcoin thing a little bit. I think your answers are going to leave me thinking for a while, so I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, Patrick.
Yeah, thank you. Can you tell people where to find you? Can you tell people about your websites and all that good stuff?
Yeah, for sure. So CoinCube.io is the website for my new business. That's coin and then CUBE, like a cube, geometrical shape.
Links in the description.
CoinCube.io.
Yep.
And then I am still on Twitter. It's my handle there is Satoshi Sound, like the sound of music, Satoshi Sound. I will be on Twitter, I think, for a while longer, but I don't know. I'm trying to migrate to some of these other platforms, and I think there may come a point when I just pull the plug entirely. Haven't quite had the courage to do that yet, but those are the 2 best ways to reach me.
Awesome. Excellent. And I think all of those links are in the description. Where can they go if they want to support Bitcoin and Friends?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Yeah. btcandfriends.com is our website. And if you go there, there's a donation button at the top. That's going to take you to a BTC Pay server instance. So you can send us Bitcoin. That's actually the only way we're accepting donations now outside of Patreon, although I don't even, that's kind of a dead thing. We haven't really been using it. We're still technically on there, but I've got some kind of gnats flying around here. But yeah, btcandfriends.com and
it's
send us a little bit of Bitcoin.
They're buzzing. It's the Goldbugs. All right.
Yeah.
Sir, I mean, excellent conversation. Thank you again. Guys, you've been a good audience. Thanks for your questions. We have a lot of shows happening between now and March when Anarchapulco happens. We're going to be interviewing a lot more guests. I think we've done like 3 shows in the last week, which is way more than normal, and I'm loving it. I'm absolutely loving it. If you have guests that you'd like to see on the show, please contact us and let us know. Anarchast.com will take you to our webpage, which is sort of like a combined website for both of our channels, and there's a support tab at the top with monthly support options. Look, going back to the beginning of our talk, you need to drop, a tip in the bucket for the things that you want to see more of. And if you want to see more of Bitcoin and Friends, go to his site and do that. I'll make sure and get a link to that in the description as well as soon as the show's over. If you want to see more of this, if you want to see more of the content that we have on our other channel, please consider, a tiny monthly donations scale up really quickly. So guys, thanks again. You've all been awesome. Sir, it's been great. Peace, love, and anarchy.